I'm curious. I want to touch on David R. Hawkins. I think
Yeah.
this is a good time with a map of consciousness a little bit because I actually, when I sold my supplement company, when I sold out of it 5 years ago to heavily lean into this work, it was a big deal for me. Huge deal. Like, I'd been running it for nearly 10 years, my identity. I didn't realize how much I was entwined in it. And I bought Letting Go on Audible by David R. Hawkins. And I would jump on my push bike and I would cycle around here by the rivers in northern New South Wales and listen to that. And it was a really powerful tool. And that's when I first really started to drop into his work. And then hearing you speak of him so highly and having known that you studied under him. And I'd heard of the map of consciousness, but I hadn't explored it. And you really sparked a huge curiosity
Oh,
yesterday when
good,
listening to
good.
that dinner time. Yeah, I'd love you just to speak to him a little bit and that, if you may.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, it honestly makes me almost emotional when I think about him because he really was such a beautiful, beautiful influence and still is. I still sometimes in my dreams, he comes up sometimes I think as a messenger for me in the way that I will perceive certain directions or information. But um, I really loved the way he explained things, and this was back. I was reading things like, Wayne Dyer and some of this stuff back probably over 20 years ago, probably 25 years ago. And often his name would come up as someone that they would quote. And so I'm eventually going, okay, that was like the third time his name came up. And I'm like, I got to go read this book, Power versus Force, because that seems to be something that a lot of these other people are sort of referencing. And when I read his book, it was life changing. It really just gave me this conceptual picture of what's going on. And so he created something called the map of consciousness, and it was sort of a calibrated scale of consciousness that he had worked out from sort of the lowest levels of consciousness, which would be right down, like the lowest of the low levels would be like shame. I think was around 20 out of 1,000, like really low level of consciousness, all the way up to pure levels of enlightenment, which would be at like 1,000, and everything in between. And he would look at these levels of consciousness from multiple perspectives, how we view our life, how we view God, what our emotional levels like, all these different things at each level. So it gave people a very tangible sense of where we were at any given time if we would take the time to actually reflect on it honestly. And so the idea was that this scale was a logarithmic scale, so that every time you move from, say, 20 to 30, that's a big jump because it's a logarithmic scale. And so it also gave perspective to where things like, say, anger can be a really beneficial emotion. If anger's, say, here, and maybe apathy or fear or shame are all down here, if you can get up to anger, that actually is a much better. The problem is that a lot of times people around you don't like that, so then you get suppressed back down again. But inside, if the person actually connects with how it feels, anger probably feels a lot better than shame, for example. And that's actually a good movement in the right direction. So it also helps to navigate where you're moving forward or if you're kind of getting stuck back a little bit. And you had to get to the level of 200, which was the level of courage, until you actually started to be pro-life, like where you were really making now beneficial steps within your own life. Anything below 200 was actually sort of self-deteriorating. And so the level of courage was the foundational level. So the two most important levels that he would talk about would be the level of courage at 200. We have to be able to get to the level of courage, which then opens up to things like neutrality and willingness and enthusiasm and then reason and logic, and all the way up to these higher states where we can eventually move to like love and peace and unconditional love and these types of things. Very hard to attain levels, but they're accessible. So courage and then love was at 500, which a very small amount of people sort of truly reach that, where they embody that and they're kind of living in that space. And the beauty of it is that as you embody, so literally as you become these sorts of fields of consciousness, the influence that has extrapolates into the world around you. So this is like the idea when Gandhi says, be the change you wish to see in the world. It really does make a difference, because he would say someone that could function at the level of, 500 could have an outreaching effect on millions of people potentially, just by holding that state of consciousness, that it actually uplifts many, many, many other people. So when we think, we got to do more out here, he would often say, leave the world alone. The world doesn't need your help. The world's fine on its own. Like, just bring it back to here, work on that yourself. So it gives me a really beautiful perspective of where I'm at. And also at the same point, the idea that each of these fields is the lens that we see the world in. So if we are in, say, a field of fear, which I think is a big one right now, we see a fearful world, and then we interact in the world from that place. We reinforce those patterns, and then we keep that going. And so if we want to experience something different, we have to be able to shift the field, because then the field directly impacts the lens that we see everything through. So it gives me a really beautiful way of sort of working with these concepts, and why it's so important to clear a lot of this stuff so that we can kind of step into these different aspects of, or these different fields of consciousness, and then see the world anew. Otherwise, we don't. It's like we just keep trying to see something new. It's like when you're trying to work with, I think about this like after, say, like a breakup. I remember being bitter years back after a really hard breakup. And I even know that wasn't necessarily the best field for me to be in. So I would be trying to convince myself to see something else, but none of it felt real because I wasn't genuinely there. You're better off to then like really be honest with where you are, allow that to almost burn itself out, so that then you can naturally fall into something else. And then you open up new possibilities for you when you're into that next field.
Yeah, no, it's great, isn't it? I think as humans, we like to know where we are. There's like, it needs to be like a goalpost or reference points, if you like, and go, oh, I'm going this way. You know what I mean? And as you explain that, it's nice to know that actually I am progressing here, because there's so many of these emotions and feelings and perspectives are intangible and they're only real to us, right? But then if you have something you can lean into to go, actually, I am progressing here. This is a good thing, even though I might be angry right now, but I've come a long way, or whatever. And the one thing I think is worth mentioning that that you mentioned in the podcast that didn't even occur to me until I heard you listen to it, is that not one is better than the other.
Right.
And I think it's probably worth speaking to that a little bit, because so often you could say, well, I'm not at number 200 right now. I'm only at number 80.
And that's such a human thing to do. We love to compare. And even I remember even going to, because we would go to Arizona and Sedona and go to lectures with Dr. Hawkins. And even the groups there, a lot of times people are wanting to try and figure out what each other's level of consciousness is. And it's all part of the same traps. I think it really doesn't make any difference to me. As a human being, it's not like you just stay there all the time. You experience the gambit of things. But to me, it's just that you spend less and less time in things and you move through them faster, because you're not getting caught in so much of the stuff that's not real anyways. All of the misperceptions and misidentifications that we place on ourselves that usually get us stuck in stuff. So there's just less getting in the way. So life's going to throw stuff at us where, I'll feel sad, or I'll feel hurt, or I'll feel angry, or whatever that might be. I don't think you're really being human, having a human experience, if you're not exploring the realm of those things. But I think you just have less clutter in the way. So it's like, do you ever remember that story the Buddha talked about with the first and second arrow? That goes through my head a lot of times. So the first arrow is the event that took place. So you lost your job, your relationship ended. Something happened that creates that first sort of suffering, that first arrow. But most of the suffering takes place with the second arrow, which is the one we shoot ourselves, which is when we get caught up in the storylines and the negative future fantasy spiral, all of those things. So I think that this work helps us get rid of more and more of that second arrow. So it doesn't mean you don't have experienced life. And I think you actually experience life more fully because you've got less stuff getting in the way. You feel all of the emotions really well. Even when fear, it's like you'll feel fear when you need to feel fear, but it actually is used to inform you to then act in a specific way in the world. I think that's the difference. Sometimes the other parts, when we get caught up with that second arrow, it doesn't help us. All it's doing is cycling us back into patterns that are not supportive. I think when we have less of that clutter, when we genuinely feel whatever, it's actually information. Our body is informing us to do something. And so even something like anxiety, for example, I think when we are clear and we're not getting caught up in all of the false perceptions and identifications in the storylines, something like anxiety is really important. If that comes up, now if I feel anxious, and because I feel like I'm working as much as I can to really try to be present and all these things, not that I always do that, but if I get anxious now, it's more of a reflection going, okay, what's going on? What am I feeling anxious about? And it's actually a directive for me to figure something out and make a change, as opposed to going into a negative future fantasy spiral or something along those lines. So I think the emotions inform us, and they also show us what's purifying. They show us what is clearing out within ourselves, and where we're still, where we still have those, I guess, those densities that are still kind of dissolving
Densities, yeah.
and clearing themselves.